Hello, everyone. If you're joining us, we are taking care of a couple little details. We will be live broadcasting this also to Facebook Live. So we're going to take a minute to get that going. And what we wanted to say right off the bat is that if you are joining us for this webinar in a participatory way, which we hope you will do, it may be helpful because we are going to build in some practice to get some props handy. And we would recommend, as you get props handy, that you have 1 to 2 tennis balls, a yoga mat, maybe 1 block, a blanket, and a hand towel that you can cover your eyes with, or an eye pillow. So once again, that is a mat, 1 to 2 tennis balls, or yoga therapy balls. We love the yoga tune-up balls, which are rubber and just a little bit more give against the skin. A block, a blanket, and something to cover your eyes with. So when it comes to being an empath, practice is hugely important. And we wanted to give just a really quick shout out to all the people in our online course that are joining us for this webinar. We sort of do these in your honor, as well as in the honor of I think, our large and growing community, which we are nicknaming the Connectome. So if you'd like to join the Connectome and get sort of a notification of some events like these early, let us know, and you can do that. We'll actually give you a link after this is over to join, and a little password to join. So, so a shout out to all of you in the online course. And actually, I took a look yesterday because I was really thinking about globalness and our global community. And so I thought I would name the countries of people that are in our online course. So we have, and I may leave a couple out that we're not aware of, but we have Portugal, France, Canada, Guatemala, Germany, Singapore, Italy, Amman, Jordan, the UK, Ireland, Norway, Saudi Arabia, Greece, Switzerland, Denmark, Poland, Australia, Japan, and more. So just a special love goes out to our community today, and a shout out to everyone that is watching on Facebook Live. So I wanted also to say, in light of that, wanted to wish everybody Shana Tova, happy Rosh Hashanah. And it's also a really interesting point in time. We've had International Peace Day, and we have also had the fall equinox. It's Navaratri in the Hindu system. So many different celebrations coming together. So it's nice for us to be able to talk with you. Without further ado, I think that we will get going here a little bit. And I wanted to sort of share that the information here that we're going through today on being an empath, and particularly in regard to the global suffering that's going on in this day and age, I think it's really, really dear to my heart in terms of being an empath and wanting to really help and wanting to be able to care without burnout. So one of the really interesting discoveries for me is that I think I have labored pretty much most of my life as a lifelong empath under some huge misunderstandings. And one of those is that empathy and compassion are finite resources. So we only have so much of them and only have so much of them to give. And also, as finite resources, I need to be able to hold the world's suffering at bay in order to survive. And I think that's a conclusion that lots of empaths come to. And this sort of mistaken understanding has caused me at times to feel like I'm apart from the suffering of the world, or unable to feel other people in the way that I would want to, in the way that my values have sort of taught me is important. And I think also the understanding that we have only two choices, to be overwhelmed or to withdraw. So I'd love to explore that with you today. And we're going to do a little bit of a slideshow and kind of show a little bit of information that we've prepared for you today. So let's see if we can really fluidly do that. So just in case, I want to let you know that we're looking at this idea of empaths, but in relation to the suffering of the world. What do we do? How do we sort of conserve our own energy? How do we kind of preserve a sense of groundedness and also cohesiveness? So we'll be looking today at a little practical science, a little embodied experience, and also some really loving support to empaths and highly sensitive people for how to stay engaged in this time of global suffering. To that end, I wanted to kind of make a confession that for me, this sort of misunderstanding of the mechanics of human suffering on a personal scale has been really key for me. And I feel that the misunderstandings that I have had about this have been dramatic and have actually contributed to suffering. And what I've learned about the science of compassion and the dynamics of social justice is so revolutionary and very life-changing to me that I just had to share it with you. And I think we want to look at these two sort of big myths, and to distill them down, the first myth I had is, okay, the last thing I need in the face of suffering is to have more compassion, more empathy. And in fact, I need to sort of turn that off. And I think the second myth is that I'm much better off as an empath in one-on-one situations or in small groups. And so forget about sort of large-scale suffering, large-scale social justice work, or even things like marches. So I think it's important for me to be able to say, like, I have gone through these beliefs, and in some ways, they're kind of alternative facts now for me as an empath. So let's talk a little bit about the distinction between an empath and just being highly sensitive. So Elaine Aron coined the term HSP, or highly sensitive person, which was a tremendous contribution to the understanding of how some people seem to be just born with a system where the nerve endings are almost on the outside, and where sort of it feels like we feel everything. We sort of respond with our nervous system to everything. So the characteristics of being a highly sensitive person, one is just a need to withdraw from others when we're busy, a sense of being overwhelmed all the time by sensory stimulation, a lot of annoyance or irritability if someone adds to our plate of things, and even just that feeling of this is not okay, a sense of being sort of unpleasantly stirred up or aroused when there's a lot happening around us, being a little shaken up by changes, like things like moves or somebody switching the time of something, plans changing, and being really sensitive or shy as a child, not wanting to sort of get out there into the fray. I have twin nephews, and one of them is an empath and one is not. So they play soccer, and the empath will sometimes sit out the first half and observe and kind of rehearse and then get right in the game. He's amazing. So understanding this as a difference helps us respond to ourselves and our children and our loved ones differently. Also, we want to be aware of subtleties in the environment around us. And I think people that are highly sensitive are super acutely aware of sound, of stimulation. Multitasking is hard. Often HSPs can be quite sensitive to pain, more so than others, and highly anxious. And I might add, I think sometimes we think of only the qualities that are tender and gentle, but highly sensitive people can be emotionally contagious to others. And I'll use the term we, because I have had that, kind of tend to broadcast our anxiety and to let others feel it in the way that we hold our bodies, in our tone of voice, in so many other ways. However, one of the really important differences is that HSPs, highly sensitive people, are not so much vulnerable to emotional contagion. And I'm going to say a little bit more about what I mean by that, but in a nutshell, it's catching other people's emotions. So what does it mean to be an empath? And spoiler alert, you can have both. And if you have both, as do I and many of our community, you have your work cut out for you. As we sort of segue into this concept of being an empath, I wanted to introduce some members of our team to you, and we are mostly, I think we self-select, all empaths. So you can probably, in a little tiny image, a thumbnail on your screen, see Catherine. And Catherine is our online course greenskeeper. So she pops into little groups or pods that meet, and you'll see her in the webinars. And if you take our course, you'll have lots of contact with her as well as with me. You might be able to see Karen's video. I think that she might be on no video, and that's okay. But Karen and Kimberly and Charlotte, and we have a couple others, Allie and also Kayla, are webinar holders, and they help with the landscaping of our online course. So we have done a lot of work in our trainings and in our work together on what it means to be an empath and how important that is. So let's explore a little bit those characteristics of being an empath. We can get this to, we might have a little glitch. So I'm going to stop share for just a moment. And we'll sort of consider, as we're sort of fixing this little glitch, to look at what does it mean to you to sort of see this information about HSP. So does it feel like, yes, I am that? Does it feel like, no, I don't particularly have a highly sensitive nervous system? Or are you one of those thinking, I have that and I might have this other thing? Or I already know that I'm an empath. So let's pop in and see if we can get our little empath slide to function, or we may have to escape out for a moment. We sometimes have these little tiny glitches with our slides. So I'm going to go in and restart. We've seen this before a couple of times, but I do love, yeah, so I'm going to get all these up there, and then let's see. Okay, we will screen share here, and apologies to those of you waiting with bated breath to see what exactly it is to be an empath, and I can talk through if necessary. So we struggle with boundaries. So that sense of where do I leave off and someone else begins. And that might sound like a strange and very ethereal kind of sentence or a little new age, but literally for empaths, if someone else, and I think particularly children, spouses, and other people is around us, it's hard to discern sort of when our awareness is really rooted in someone else and when it's kind of vested and grounded in ourselves. Often empaths are out of body, and that means that our awareness is, as we said, in somebody else's reality or in the future somewhere, kind of planning, arranging, figuring out how we can sort of protect and help others. And at the same time, we're prone to the same nervous system overdrive that highly sensitive people are. And those two go hand in hand. So I wanted just to distill a little bit that having nervous system overdrive, being a highly sensitive person, often means that our awareness is out of our body. It's scanning the environment, which empaths do constantly, and we scan other people's faces for tiny little nuances of what's happening. And also, at the same time, scanning the environment, scanning the future, looking for signs of danger or disturbance. Interestingly, because empathy is considered to be such a wonderful trait, empaths can have a little difficulty with intimacy. And part of that is simply defining who we are in relation to others. And that might become a little important as we go through some of this material. Often we're either trying very hard to be centered in ourselves, and sometimes in maybe timing that's rather inelegant. As I'll speak for myself on that. So we might be thinking, what about me? When am I going to have my time or my energy? Or when are people going to sort of celebrate or notice or see me? And then very often for empaths, and we'll talk a little bit about this in terms of emotional contagion, when we are sort of infected with someone else's emotions, or when we sort of take our awareness and lift it into someone else's body, by definition, that feels like a boundary invasion, even if we're not overtly conscious of it. So sometimes what can happen there is that we can sort of have this idea of other. There's an other over there, or this experience is other, or that person is other. And it's almost a means of conserving our empathic energy. However, the filter that decides what and who is other is set to a pretty sensitive setting. So, for example, if I have that with Catherine, it might be that just by looking at her, I decide, oh, she's different than me, or she's in a good mood today and I am not, or the idea she's expressing is different from me. So this self-other is a key part of the filter that empaths go through their lives with. And so that I might more easily take offense if I've made Catherine other, or if I've decided that she's part of me and therefore needs to reflect me all of the time, to be available to me all of the time. She is me. She's an extension of me. So why would she be separate? So we can get a little bit vexed or verklempt when somebody else that we've identified as part of self is behaving in a way that we ourselves would not want, or we can overly other people. That man over there is dangerous, or that woman is a bitch, and in like a very brief amount of time. So emotional contagion is the sort of ability to catch other people's emotions in much the same way that you might catch a cold or a flu. And it's very difficult to discern what's happening. And often empaths can suddenly, in or after the presence of someone else, feel a profound sense of grief, or really angry and stirred up, or anxious, and sort of be incubating those feelings with very little awareness that they don't actually belong to us. And that's sort of an interesting point of investigation, and one which we're going to attempt together to sort of begin a little bit of empathic differentiation. So if I am suddenly anxious in the presence of someone else, or maybe long after I've left them, it's helpful for me to sort of know my own interior and to be able to say, oh, wait, I just had lunch with so-and-so. They were very anxious. Could that be part of my direct experience in this moment? And so just a little quick tidbit that mindfulness practices for empaths can be a little sticky, a little difficult to navigate, because if we're being present with sensations and emotions in the moment, they could be somebody else's emotions and sensations. And so for empaths, in my opinion, it's helpful to ground into our own body and practice embodiment and have mindfulness be part of our practice in that context. Okay. We have difficulty as empaths figuring out where we leave off and someone else begins, where even to the point of sort of understanding and knowing what we want to eat, we often sort of eat according to the people around us and what choices they might want, or someone else's needs. And one of the things I've noticed recently for myself, and so if you're watching or watching later, you might consider, there have been so many demands, I think, on my time that often I'll get very drawn into a request that comes from someone else or fulfilling that, which in the moment is fine. But as soon as it's done, I'll continue to sort of think about it. It will be in my body. I'll be sort of adding to it. And I'll help that person so thoroughly and well. It will be like a dissertation on whatever it was they wanted. So I noticed that pattern. And then also the idea of unhooking from that situation, from that person, or even from an activity, and taking my attention and switching it to something else, or switching it back to my own body and experience is a little challenging. And then there's this self-other distinction we talked about, that filter that's set to kind of an overly sensitive setting. I should say, because empaths often, we focus on our lovely qualities, or the ones that get us into trouble, but there is also a tendency to judge to other people in empaths that I think is an ingenious coping strategy that really works for us in dangerous situations or perhaps in childhood. But when we carry it into adulthood, we make other people into other or different, we have an inflammatory response to them. And so I want to highlight that a little bit in case I forget to say that the tendency to always see other, to make other people into other, and not only empaths do this, but others, but to make other people other is a kind of inflammatory condition. It's like an autoimmune response, if we're talking about our psychological immune system, that is an inflammatory state. And the tendency to always project self and to be focused on what we need as an empath is also an inflammatory response. And that's sort of akin to having a very weak immune system, not being able to kind of take in a sort of broader expanse. So much of today, I think, in some ways, our time together is dedicated to sort of reducing that inflammatory response. And being able to kind of notice also when it's happening. So I thought it would be helpful to kind of take a little bit of a poll here. And so we'll go into our first poll. And the question is just, do you consider yourself to be an empath? And the first answer is yes, for sure. The second one is, I'm a little bit more highly sensitive person than empath. So I have the chronic nervous system activation, but without kind of losing myself in other people's emotions. And the third is, I'm still not sure. And then the fourth is, no, definitely I'm not an empath. Also, I think it would be cool to sort of consider, if you're not an empath, if you're in that sort of maybe minority in this particular group of people that we're talking to, as it turns out in the poll, you might be noticing that some of what we're talking about is true for someone you love, for others. So we're going through that poll and we'll leave it up for a little bit, but so far we have 72% and growing of our people watching in Zoom. So that's not counting Facebook Live, but if you're watching on Facebook Live, please post, are you an empath? Are you a highly sensitive person? Are you not sure? Or maybe you're not. And do you love someone who is? Do you care for people that are empaths? So we're in the 70s in terms of percentage. I think I may not have inquired in this polling session for are you both an empath and an HSP? So we could ask for just a show of hands. If you're both an empath and an HSP, let us know. So we've got 70, in the 70%, yes, for sure, I'm an empath. Still not sure is 21%. HSP is 15%. No is at 0. So we have nobody that says, I am not an empath. And we probably have a fair amount of people with both. So we're going to pause on that polling for a moment and just consider, with such a high population of people, I think it's really important to kind of take into account that having both means that we have our homework cut out for us. So we'll go back into screen share, look in our empath survival guide, and then I thought it would be important to actually move now into a tool and to sort of reflect on, here we go with a little tiny glitch. Sometimes when we have these multiple screens, I think we run into the issue of PowerPoint not liking that multiple screen. So here, we'll come back in and screen share again. So I thought we would do a practice together in the moment. And this may seem like a subtle practice. It may seem like something that isn't helpful to you in the moment, but it turns out to be sort of one of the most important tools for both highly sensitive people and empaths, and really anyone who has a body in this lifetime and has a response to the tremendous human suffering that's going on around us. And we call this our embodied check-in. So let's see if we can get that up on our screen. So yeah, we'll give it a little time. So here we go. And sometimes we get our little panelists in the way. So just take a moment where you are, and you can do this on your back, actually, with your knees bent. You can do this seated or cross-legged. You can do this with your feet right on the floor. In any position. You can do it standing. You can do it in your car. So this is a very portable tool. And we'll do a little check-in. We'll get our baseline. So I'll invite you to close your eyes. And then we like to place our hands on our body. And you could place both hands on the abdomen. You could put both on your heart. Or you could have a hand on the abdomen, a hand on the heart, or literally anywhere else. So we'll take a moment to sort of be aware of the sense of touch as our hands are meeting our body. And then beginning to breathe through the nose. And you can even separate your upper and lower jaw so that you're not sort of, I think often we clench our jaw when our mouth is closed and we sort of hold in the face and therefore in the organs of perception, the head of the eyes. So we're turning the volume down on our visual sense. And then just asking the question, am I in my body? So am I in my body in this moment? And is there the presence of strong emotion? And if so, where do these emotions live in my body? So they might be sort of in the heart, they might be in the abdomen, they might be elsewhere in the low back or any number of areas, neck, chest area. And so we're learning to identify our own sort of emotional patterns, not in a super linear way, but where do we tend to inhabit emotion? And then for empaths and HSPs, energy level and noticing that is important. So we'll look at what is the energy level in my body in this moment. So do I feel exhausted and really low in energy? Do I feel pretty energized or maybe somewhere in the middle between the two? And then what is the speed of my mind? Are my thoughts racing? Is there a really strong narrative that's happening right now for me? Am I stuck on a kind of mental channel that I really can't get past? And what is the sort of quality or focus of our thoughts? Is there discomfort or pain in the body? And if so, where might that be? What is the quality of our self-to-self relationship? The kind of affection, neutrality, emotional attitude or presence that we bring to ourselves. And then do we have a mindset as empaths that empathy and compassion are finite resources and that we need to conserve them? And then just taking a moment to sort of notice how you feel now. And you may even, after every check-in, re-inquire, am I in my body any differently now than I was just a moment ago? And then transitioning your eyes slowly to open. I want to take a moment also to sort of highlight that for empaths, our visual sense and auditory as well are the ways that we pick up on cues from other people and suffering from other people. So incorporating tools that allow for the eyes to close, that allow for sound to be sort of lowered is tremendously important. And I'm remembering on my first silent retreat where you're not allowed to make eye contact, at first was such a struggle for me, and then an incredible relief not to have to pick up cues from everyone all the time. So this is sort of the empath's #1 tool. The measurements are key toward the empathic tendencies that we have, but also very good for differentiating other people's emotions from our own. So if you've just spent time with someone and or you've been in a situation and then you're feeling something either in the moment or later on, it's a wonderful way to get to know the sort of difference in tone, the felt sense of our own stuff versus the felt sense of something that's intruding when we've been contaged, to notice location sometimes of emotion, the sensation in our physical body, like where is it, how does it feel, and even the quality of feeling. And I also like to look at, and I think this one might take sort of practice and time, but the sense of what is the degree of invasion? Like, am I contaged sort of at 100%? Am I contaged at 75%? How is that going? And what we thought we would do is actually take a moment here to sort of look into the science of compassion. So as I've said, I've really sort of feel that the science of compassion offers those of us who feel so deeply as empaths a really life-changing understanding of how to thrive and how to feel and how to be of service, especially now at this time in our collective suffering. The definition of compassion is to suffer with. And empaths, I feel, often understand it as a suffering alone, like I'm suffering, those other people might be suffering, but our own experience is so present and so big because of these very porous and really permeable boundaries between ourselves and others. The term compassion actually comes from the same root as the Hebrew word rechem. And that means uterus or womb. And so it's a wonderful thing to be using that imagery, but in a slightly different way than empaths do, which is, I think, to become the womb that holds the world's suffering instead of being held within that womb-like enclosure. And we'll look at that as we practice a little later. And then we want to look at also this sense of compassion is our response to the inevitability of pain and sorrow in the world. And often for empaths and highly sensitive people, and really almost many people today, there's a sense of just terrible grief and inability to hold. There's such universal suffering. Every time we turn on social media or television or anything like that. So let's take a little bit of a look at the science of compassion and how it can really be a revolutionary context in which to understand our own suffering. So compassion is sort of the awareness of suffering and also the recognition of suffering, that people are suffering. And it's a feeling of connection to the one who is suffering and a feeling of concern. And note that it's not necessarily, I think empaths see it as a feeling of overwhelm, and that's different, or distress. Also with compassion, there's a desire to relieve that suffering, to actually alleviate the suffering of others. And a willingness to respond. I think, again, we've talked about a little bit today, the idea that many people who are highly sensitive or highly empathic feel like, I can't respond, I can't handle that. Or we become really engulfed in or subsumed by universal suffering. We are born with a basic capacity for compassion, all of us. And the one thing that I think is important to keep in mind as we look a little more closely at the science is that compassion is valuable not just for the person who is being helped, which could be ourselves or others, but it's also helpful to the person receiving it. And it's helpful to the person witnessing it, as well as giving it. And I think for me, that understanding has really caused me to rethink how I sort of understand my own role in the world, and that giving true compassion as opposed to empathic distress is beneficial to me in myriad ways, including physiological, and even witnessing someone else receive compassion as well. As we head into the stages, I wanted to pause for just a moment and invite you to think back to or consider a time, and you could do this sort of in grounded contemplative check-in mode, when you have either offered compassion to someone else or received compassion from someone in a difficult interlude in your life, or witnessed compassion being offered to someone else. And what was that like? What were the feelings that went along with that? What was the sort of residue of that? When I think back to moments of compassion and tenderness, I often feel that there's been a grace. So that even if I've been the person sort of traditionally what we would call offering compassion, I have benefited 1,000-fold, and often in ways where the measurement that we use is completely sort of irrelevant. I'll give one example, is that at a conference not long ago, I was with a colleague who ended up having an asthma attack. And we were headed back to where we were going to stay, and I had lots of work to do to prepare. And so not only were we together during that time, but we sat and drank tea afterwards. And I learned a lot about his health and issues that hadn't been shared with other people. And it was an experience of total grace, and one in which sort of that long to-do list that I had to do completely receded. And I felt that actually the compassion had come from him directly to me and allowing me to inhabit that space with him. We didn't have a witness, but I think we both witnessed one another. I can think of another very recent experience in which at a panel presentation with multiple colleagues, one of my colleagues became ill. And so I was with her as she was vomiting and sick, and several colleagues came into the room and sort of shared that experience. And so while she was being held literally physically, and then by some people visually and emotionally, everybody felt that that was a really rare embodied moment. So one important thing to know is that compassion is not a thing that occurs in sort of like a lightning bolt, like we feel it or we don't. But it's actually, the science of compassion shows that there are 3 stages. And often when we don't understand that, we can get stuck in the first 2 and be unable to move through that. So the first stage in the science of compassion, and I'm going to give a shout out here to Thumpton Jimpa's book, The Fearless Heart, which has a lot of this amazing science in it, and we'll post that resource at the end of today. I'll write myself a little note. And also to the Stanford Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education, where I have studied a little bit, and I know Karen has as well. So a lot of this new research is coming out of there. So there's an alarm response to suffering. And what's really interesting is that a lot of people feel like compassion should be gentle and soft and kind of no nervous system activation. We should be very kind of mellow and meditative and contemplative when we experience it, when we offer it, and when we witness it. And that, in fact, is not true. And I think this is very important to anyone who's sensitive to know that the first stage, and we really have to go through it, in response to suffering, the suffering of others, is alarm. Mathieu Ricard, who it has been studied quite a bit in contemplative neuroscience and other forms of contemplative science, has had, I think 40,000 or more hours of meditation, is also said to be the happiest person in the world. And he has gone through scanning and study. And in the studies in which he participated, he was exposed to sounds of suffering. So not even the sight, but sounds of a woman screaming and other things. And the first response was shown to be an alarm response, even in a monk and someone who's been practicing mindfulness for, many decades, I think 30 or 40 years. The first response is alarm. And the anterior insula is activated. And what I love about that is sort of one of the homes or the hubs for interoception in the brain. So that's mindful awareness of the body. And what has been shown is that the more experienced you are in compassion practice or loving kindness meditation or mindfulness, the greater the amygdala or alarm response is in the brain. So that's a very extraordinary and, to me, a really freeing insight, is that we need to go through alarm in order to get to the rest. And then if we sort of take this into account, what it would mean to be a highly sensitive person or an empath, very often alarm is the indication that we need to withdraw or run, or it's the cue to lose ourselves in the suffering of others. So one contemplative practice sort of tidbit is that you could simply take the alarm response, and I think we'll be able to practice that together, and become very consciously aware of the alarm, and then slow enough in your embodied check-in. So where do I feel it? What is it like? Am I in my body? And then feeling the impulse to go to withdrawal. What does that feel like in our bodies? Is it kind of in the gut, or is it like, I have to go? Like, can we notice that as it's happening? And then can we actually incubate that? What's been shown is that people who are not expert at compassion tend to try to turn down the stress response. And I would put empaths and highly sensitive people in that category. It's like, nope, I don't want to feel this. I'm going to become all what we might say Zen, or I'm going to mask it, or I'm going to withdraw. And we might not even know we're withdrawing. And certainly someone else might not know that we're doing it either. So one inquiry is, where do you see yourself in this work? Have you tried building in time to note the alarm response, to sort of do an embodied check-in? Do you feel like you have a robust compassion response? And these studies are linked here. This one is from Richie Davidson's lab at the University of Wisconsin. Easy to Google as well. So we know the threat system in the response is, the threat system is activated. Compassion is rooted in the alarm response, but it doesn't stay there. So the second stage in compassion is when there are areas of the brain associated with empathy respond. And this one feels very vitally important to me for empaths. There's emotional contagion occurs in these centers as well. Mirror neurons are activated. And what's curious is that it's accompanied by evaluation, the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, so the midline of the prefrontal cortex, and the part that sort of judges other or self. I like this, I don't like that, I have to run, I can't stand it. All of those things are co-activated along with the empathy centers. So the center is sort of related to interoception that we talked about, that mindfulness in the body, and also to the bodily self. There's also a binding of any direct experience with evaluation. I feel really sad. Oh, that means I can't take this suffering. Or I feel really sad. The world is a terrible place. Or I feel very afraid. therefore it's not safe, or I'm never going to reach equilibrium, or will never be able to help people. That evaluation happens in response to our own distress and the stirring up of our emotions. So empathic distress, which is what we would call this stage, and the emotional contagion that go along with it are really important parts in the unfoldment of compassion. What's really important is that, and really revolutionary for me, is that as an empath, I had not realized that I was stuck in the stage of empathic distress almost all of the time in response to other people's suffering, and therefore I was suffering too, and then having this sort of kind of push me, pull you, if you're young enough to have seen Dr. Dolittle, but this sense of like, oh, I'm all in it, oh, I have to push away. That binary approach to dealing with the suffering of others and becoming very depleted by it. That was my experience. And then in empathic distress, there's a lot of selfing, like I'm so giving, or I don't have enough, or I can only do so much, or this person is pissing me off. And then, as you might imagine, there's also a ton of othering. That person is asking for too much, or those people don't deserve our help, or those people need everything that I can give. But if compassion continues to unfold, we can experience a sense of stabilization and the kind of compassion that benefits the empath offering it, or experiencing it, or receiving it, or anyone else for that matter, not just empaths. And that the research shows that this increases heart rate variability, which is the interval between the beats of our heart. And it is one of the primary ways of measuring stress resilience. So we might even think of the topic of compassion resilience. What would that look like for an empath? Or even empathic resilience. I'm going to take a tiny pause there for us to just sort of consider that moving through the stages of alarm and empathic distress without stopping the process there in the interest of self-preservation can be a very beautiful sort of adaptive insight, and one that sort of helps us shift our coping strategy. In this third stage of compassion, the vocal cords are often relaxed. There's a lower tone of voice and better what we call prosody, which is the ability to sort of resonate with others through voice. And here are some of the other things that happen. There's an increase in oxytocin, which has been considered our sort of social and even moral molecule, or neurotransmitter. And the reward system of the brain activates. There's a tendency to want to approach, to tend and befriend others, which is kind of significant because for many of us, after the alarm response and the emotional contagion, we don't necessarily want to approach. We either get all sort of caught up in others or we kind of pull away. The same areas of the brain here activate as the areas that activate when someone puts a really amazing and very appetizing food in front of you. So the threat state that we occur in both alarm and empathic distress, where everything feels like an intrusion, begins to shift and become an approach state. And this is historically very difficult for empaths and can often be extremely liberating and freeing. So the bottom line here is that compassion is not a simple tool, but it's a multi-staged one, and it has contrasting stages. And we can really develop the biology, the capacity in our body, the resilience, the embodiment, the discernment that supports the expression of compassion, that enables us to sort of play a more prominent role in social justice issues, to not feel like we simply have to watch or to stand by or to withdraw in order to survive. And that choosing intentionally can be really helpful. We're going to do a practice here. And before we head into it, and I'll highlight this again, I'm going to invite you all to watch a video together. And this video can be upsetting, so we know that we're going to go through these stages of compassion, the alarm response, the empathic distress, and then to really embody this, because we can talk about science forever, and we're going to offer a tool, several tools actually, tiered tools, to kind of show what it looks like to actually move through those stages in a way that's self-affirming and self-renewing, rather than sort of self-negating or draining. So as we sort of start into this, we'll start by just getting another baseline, as we did before. And so you might put your feet on the ground, or make sure your bum is on the ground. You have what one of my teachers calls a rooted bum. This is the rooted bum embodiment check-in. And just inquiring, am I in my body in this moment? And you can have hands on the body, eyes a little bit closed. Are there emotions? And if so, where are they and where do they live in my body? What is the depth of my breath? And so am I breathing deeply? We know nasal breath especially is important for sort of attenuating the alarm response. And then the mind, what is the speed of the mind? What kind of channel surfing might the mind be doing? What is the quality of our thoughts? Are they hopeless? Are they activated? Are they sort of proactive or positive? And is discomfort present in the body? And if so, where might it be? And then again, looking at the quality of our relationship with ourselves in this moment. Is there any negative self-evaluation, or do we have a sense of openness, a sense of holding the self in this moment? And when that check-in feels complete to you, you can transition your eyes to open. And we'll sort of move through, and again, this video can be upsetting to watch. It's actually to watch or observe suffering is part of compassion training, but it's a couple minutes long. So if you wanted to take a break at this point in time and you feel like you would prefer not to participate, feel free. We're going to watch together, and because we have not shown embedded video before, we have two places where we could show. So we'll see if this works together. And this is a video that was taken at Standing Rock. It is not physically violent, so I will tell you that. And it was developed by Indigenous Rising Media, and it speaks about the high incidence of assault and stalking and sexual abuse in Native women. And so that's the topic of the video. It doesn't depict any violence, but you'll have a curious experience perhaps as we look at the science research later on, in which many Indigenous practices mirror the sort of modern contemplative practices of mindfulness and loving kindness and compassion. So let's see if we can get this to work. Let's see, there we go. So we'll sit back and kind of watch here.
Hi, Bo. I wonder if we could restart the video. You might see people saying there's no sound on our side.
Bo, did you hear Kimberly? We aren't getting sound.
No.
We aren't getting, yeah, we aren't getting audio with the
You're
video
not.
at the
You're
moment.
not. Okay, so let's. You're getting video, no audio?
Video, no audio? Correct, yep.
Let's see what we can do.
Let's see what we can do.
And I'm also hearing an echo. So we're gonna. I'm gonna move over. Okay, so tell me if this will work. This is super.
No, we're still not getting audio.
No audio?
No audio? No audio.
We have no audio and a little.
I wonder, we can probably share that video in our follow-up email, because I think it's a good one to have awareness of if you have not seen it. And I wonder, would it be helpful to maybe do one of our Plan Bs? Of course, we have Plan Bs.
Yes.
and maybe there's just so much that has happened in the last week around current events that even though we wanted to share something that we could all experience together, there's so much going on in the world that we could sit with for this.
Yeah, we will share that. Are you hearing an echo at all?
Just a baby one.
Yeah, because I'm definitely hearing. Okay, so all of you watching, we have a tiny glitch. And we've got no audio, but you know, it might be, this was such a good one too. We could try one more time to see if it will embed, and the echo's gone. So we'll give it one more try, and if not, we'll go right back to Plan B and we'll talk about the suffering in the world and maybe in Myanmar, and we'll work up an empathic lather. So one more time, with apologies to all of you. We worked so hard on these things, so let's see where we will go to find this.
But you may need to, I don't know if you hear me, but you may need to, there's a button that says share computer audio or share audio. It may be more from your computer as opposed.
Oh, really?
Sort of internal. Yeah,
where do you see that? Oh,
I don't see it, but anyone who is participating thoughtfully suggested this, and I do remember having to do something like that when doing a presentation.
Yeah, we have computer audio is connected.
Okay.
So in the options, it does say computer audio connected, speakers, and audio options, microphone. Yeah. Well, we'll try it one more time, and then you guys, because you're unmuted, just tell me if it's not working. All right, here we go. We're gonna. Yes, no?
Yes, no? No.
No. I wonder if you mute your end, but let the computer play.
Say again, Allie?
I wonder if you mute your end, but let the computer play.
Yes, no?
Yes, no? No. So thank you all who are commenting in request for the link. We will share that with you. I think to keep us all on the same track as far as timing goes in the webinar, we'll move on to Plan B, but then we will share that link with you to be able to watch post-webinar.
Yeah, so it's a great way to practice, and I think one of the things that we can talk about, we can certainly talk about Myanmar, we can sort of consider. So I think what we'll do, rather than, our plan was to sort of enhance our compassion and our alarm response for this particular group of people, and also for, I think, all women everywhere that have gone through this. And so we'll allow you on your own to practice that. We'll provide the link. And then I think what would be helpful is to go into the layers of practice that we would recommend doing when we've been really touched by someone else's suffering. So let's give that a try. It's possible that, yeah, I almost want to try again, but we won't. So I think what we would do after that point is to do an embodied check-in again. So when we've been sort of impacted, when we feel the suffering of someone else, to do an embodied check-in and to ask the same questions that we just asked. And we've kind of done that part. So we'll assume that we can, let's see, I'm going to move this for a moment. So we'll assume that we've done this check-in, we've felt contagion, we feel sad, we feel the suffering of others, we might feel hopeless, and we're kind of figuring out together, where is it in my body? And it's sort of universal suffering. So do I feel universal suffering differently in my body? And if so, how is that different than the suffering that I just have that's my own sort of natural, organic suffering? And does it live in a different place? Does it feel different? And then we would move to, after that check-in, we would sort of go to our next practice. So the check-in is a practice in and of itself. We would go to the next practice. And that next practice, Catherine is going to assist us in showing. The next one is we call quadratus lumborum, or QL on the ball. And we'll get, if we can, so we have a couple of cranky Zoom issues happening here. I hope none of the HSPs are, well, if you are experiencing empathic alarm on our behalf, that would be, of course, a good opportunity for practice. So this is a QL roll on the ball, and we'll invite you to practice with us if you'd like, and we'll do an abbreviated variation. So often we sort of luxuriate, but what I will say is that this one takes a little bit less time than some of the others. And you might be wondering, well, why are we focusing on the QL? And Catherine's going to also show with her hand sort of where the QL is. And we have one on each side. So she takes her hand to her back, and you can see that it goes literally from the lower ribs right into the sacrum. And I think I can make, I'm going to spotlight your video. So we can see that. Yeah, and then yeah. Okay. So let's move into this picture. And then Catherine's going to show. So we don't. Probably need to do screen share. And we do have a bit of an echo. So if that echo turns out to be a huge bummer, we will maybe I'll try my earbuds. So you're going to see Catherine and her props. So she's got a mat. And she has two balls. And she has a block. Yeah. And we take the balls on the same side. Yeah. And they'll extend literally from the lower ribs down toward the SI joint. And so if you're practicing with us or if you're watching, she is going to go on her back. And you can take them out as you're laying down, but I love the way she's holding them because she sort of sensitizes the area that we're going to do. Yeah, and then at first, she starts without a block, even though she's sort of used to having it. And then we sort of breathe deeply here. And then in this first part, really sort of taking time to consider the level of volume of the sensation. Is it too high, that volume? Is it just right? And if it feels loud and too strong, you can take a pair of socks and just cover the balls. And we might stay here for a while. Or Catherine might tip onto the right side that she's working on. Because the QL wraps around. And then she might even sort of come back and experiment with a little leg movement. And so drawing that right knee a little in toward the chest, moving a little to the side. And then considering that a gentle touch hydrates the tissue. And having the volume too high can be inflammatory. We can take a block behind her head if she wants to raise the volume a little bit. And then, of course, less is more. So she'll take the block out and sort of start a slow and mindful exit. And then here, allow the tissue to reshape itself. So we have so much that shapes us from the outside. So creating a sense of allowing our connective tissue matrix, which is a metaphor for our connectedness, allowing it to take its own shape. And then then slowly coming onto the other side. And we can start to feel the contemplative aspects of working with our tissue. And also as a means to embodiment. And as Catherine lets her tissue reshape itself, it's a really good time to move together back into another check-in. And so we might inquire, am I in my body? What is the level of energy in my body? What is the speed of my mind? And where are emotions now in my body? And how are they different? Yeah, we can look also at the quality of our self-to-self relationship. And then when your bodies feel ready, coming back to center. And so the beauty of connective tissue work is that it's very helpful to the nervous system for the alarm response. And it's great for sort of identifying our boundaries and sort of drawing them. And also for empathic distress, doing a little differentiation between our own emotions and those of others. And then it's also helpful in cultivating that third stage of compassion. So I want to check in for a moment because I can hear an echo. And I want to find out if anyone else is hearing it too. And then we might decide whether we want to. So we might, let's stop. I'm going to stop the Facebook live stream. Sorry, Facebook peeps. Okay. Yep, still echoey. We're trying to figure out a good solution for you guys because we literally worked for hours with them. I wonder if I might be able to leave the meeting and come back in. Don't do that.
I don't think so. I think that'll leave it for everybody.
Catherine, if you mute your microphone, does that make any difference with the echo? I'm not sure.
Say again.
I think
we were just trying muting me to see if it would help, and I actually didn't hear an echo on your end that time, though. It looks like it's getting better.
Oh, really? So we could try, I guess we could try, muting all the panelists. Yeah, I do feel like that's better. Ooh, that was easy. So maybe what we can do, I'm trying to think. I'm going to start again our Facebook. No, that's totally not.
We got a question in the Q&A. Specific or from a couple people about why the QL practice in particular.
I think we spoke to that only briefly as being sort of that area of the body, kind of right alongside the spine here, closely tied into the nervous system. However, I feel like it's really important to not give the impression that we should be always tying body parts to sort of effects of an exercise. So literally we could have chosen any one of a number of things, including stimulating the connective tissue of the abdomen as well. So that's, I think that's important to know. So yeah, thank you for that question. So we talked about doing ball work on the piriformis and other things like that. So before I think we can, I'm not hearing the echo at all. So maybe it was having the two microphones at the same time. It's good learning. We could try, maybe I'll try the live stream one more time. And then if that turns out to create an echo, we won't. Yep, okay, so it's prepping the live stream now. So we'll probably run this again so we can figure out a really good way to show the window and to show the video. But so literally almost any tissue work that works for you is helpful. And then if you are participating with us, we would do another embodied check-in after that. And yeah. We just had a little glitch. That was a Facebook Live glitch that literally recorded and repeated my words back to me. There's nothing worse for an empath than hearing your own words repeated back to you. It's completely painful. All right, so let's screen share again and see where we are here for those of us that are in. So what I'd like to try now is to actually to take it out to a more universal stage. So how we might look at these universal principles of compassion and try an embodied compassion practice. So in this embodied compassion practice, we'll have a loved one as the focus, then we'll have ourselves as the focus. We'll use it with a stranger and then also with someone that is difficult. And we'll sort of also call into our awareness a group of people as well. So with strangers and with the difficult people, you could make into group or not. And the really important part to highlight is that often for empaths and highly sensitive people and just people who care a lot about the world, there's this idea that compassion is a finite resource, that we have to conserve it in order to survive. And then if we do compassion practice, which I used to think, we're just going to be giving more of that away and draining ourselves. And I find this to be really liberating, the understanding that it does not have to happen like that. So we'll be using some terms like, may you be safe, may you be held, and may you know that you are not alone. Okay. So we're gonna go through that together, and you don't really need the screen. So I'm gonna lead you through that practice. And one of the really beautiful consistencies in many of the world religions is that they say that we are one body. We are one body. So I'd like you to imagine this one body, maybe visually, what does it look like? What does it seem like to you? And to imagine this one body as the source of compassion, this universal source of compassion. And then making sure that you're comfortable and you can lie on your back with your knees bent, as we had Catherine doing before. You can be seated, you can do this standing. You can also do it forward on your abdomen. And just beginning to breathe through your nose. And hands on the body is sort of a wonderful way to kind of reimagine that womb of compassion that we talked about, rechem. I'm just imagining that we're held in this womb or vessel of compassion that's an infinite source that is larger than we are. It is bigger than us. It includes us, but it is vast and renewable and unending. And then imagine breathing in. As you breathe in through your nose, you're drawing in from that universal source of compassion, that one body, that groundedness and energy from this one body that we are. And drawing that into your heart center or into your abdomen or both. Sometimes it's easier to hold one spot in the body. And then as you exhale, you're sending it out into the world around you. So we inhale in from that larger source of compassion, the one body, that holds us all. We inhale through to the heart or the abdomen, and then exhale that out into the world around us. Inhaling from that large, unending source of compassion, feel it touch the body and enter. And then exhaling it back out. So this compassion, once again, is not coming from us. We're just a little air circulation system or prana circulation system. And we'll continue in that way. And then holding in your awareness within that one body, someone who is very dear to you, a loved one. And breathe in from that one body of endless prana and life force and compassion. Let it touch into you and then let it circulate out. Let it pranify out. And as you imagine this person who is dear to you, you might, rather than thinking, may you be safe, or may you be held, or may you know that you are not alone, imagine that person also held within this one body. May that you know that you are part of this one body. May you know that you are not alone. May you feel held. May you feel the compassion that is bigger than you. May you feel that you are part of this one body. May you know that to be true. May you be nourished. And you can either continue with this person that you love, or you could move to yourself, the empath self, or the highly sensitive self, or the self that cares. May I really feel with every fiber of my being that I am part of this one body. May I feel that universal wellspring of compassion that is bigger than me. May I be nourished by that universal compassion that doesn't come from me, that is renewable. And where can I feel that in my body as I inhale from that big one body and exhaling it back out to the world, to all beings in that one body. May I feel held in that one body. May I feel the feelings of safety. May I know that I am not alone. May I actually be able to touch, to feel awareness of all the bodies in that one body and of that one body itself. And then here we'll condense and also allow for diversity in the unity of our practice. And you can choose a stranger or a group of strangers that are suffering. You could choose also a difficult person. So normally we might do these in 2 stages, but we're going to condense. You could choose a difficult person in your life, someone with whom you've clashed or sort of been at odds. Or, and there's no shortage of this around, a group of difficult people, someone with whose beliefs you might differ. And you can always go back to yourself or to the loved one, or simply to breathing in from that universal compassion. So you can change streams at any point in time. And so again, breathing in from this one body, this source of compassion and empathy that is bigger than we are. And let it touch us, touch ourselves, enter our body. And then with every exhale, we're sending it back to that source. You can stay here and just be nourished, just drink from that big one body. And then imagining this stranger or difficult person or group of people we don't know or difficult group that we've struggled with. And as we breathe in from that one body, that universal source of compassion, as we let it infuse our heart or abdomen, and as we exhale it back, just having the sense, just like me, you want to be happy and free from suffering. And in that way, we are alike. Just like me, you want to be happy and free from suffering. And in that way, we are alike. May you feel safe within this one body. Again, breathing in from that one body, exhaling it to all the bodies and to that one body. May you feel held. May you know that you are not alone. And that there are people who feel with you and on your behalf. May you feel this one body as I do now. May you feel its presence. And may you feel held within that. And then literally continuing for as long as you like, breathing in from that large one body, that universal source of compassion. You could even imagine the look or statue or something that within which we're held. Letting it touch in either the heart or the abdomen or alternating, and then exhaling it out. And we're not exhaling our own life force, but simply sort of circulating the prana, circulating the compassion. And then slowly transitioning your eyes to open at any time when this feels organically complete. And then the idea is that we would literally do another check-in. So we'd get a baseline. Am I in my body in this moment? How are my emotions and where are they? Where are they living? Is anything different than when we were contaged or overwhelmed with the suffering of others or feeling depleted? And to that end, what's the energy level now in the body? And very often there's a rejuvenating impact of this universal compassion. And then anything else that seems important. And because we talked about this form of compassion as benefiting the self, you might also look at what is the quality of our self to self relationship. Do we feel different inside our own skin in this moment? There are other alternatives, so we just want to mention that child's pose with the forehead on the block and the arms in can be also practiced. And so as we move toward closing, there's a few more things to talk about, and apologies for the time we lost in brainstorming, and also much appreciation to the collective solving of this community problem today. But I wanted to revisit for a moment this designation of self and other that empaths can do, and also all people can do, and that those often happen in two-person interactions and also in group interactions. And often the preference for an empath to always want that two-person, that dyad, that one-on-one, or that small group can lead us to almost greater emotional contagion and help. It sort of almost causes us to lose this larger one body, this larger source of compassion. So I wanted to kind of float this idea of 2 million person interactions, or 10 million or 50 million, that don't have to feel the same as these sort of dyads in which we can get tripped up a little and have what I like to call sudden repulsion syndrome, where people disgust us or where we can't sort of approach and feel for other people. So just a little bit more as we come to a close, and looking at what's the difference between empathy and compassion training. And that is such a valuable question, because empathy is often thought of in contemplative science as a very beneficial thing, something we want to grow. But knowing what we now know, we might ask, is that important? Or could that lead to empathic distress? Do we actually really want to instill more compassion training? So in this study, there were statements that people were asked to make and forms of contemplative compassion and empathy practice that were adopted. And you can kind of see the differences in some of these. So I see your pain versus I share in your suffering. Or may you be sheltered by compassion. May you be safe. You are not alone. And so they looked at compassion training and found that even though it was not designed to increase empathy, it actually did increase empathy, which is an interesting finding. And that compassion practice increased positive emotions like love and gratitude and happiness, stimulated, this isn't unexpected, the reward centers of the brain, and also did not lead to having people feel less negative emotions. And that's important, because we don't practice compassion in order to turn the volume down on having fewer negative emotions, but we do so sort of in order, for its own sake, as a devotional practice. And they found that compassion training balances negative and positive affect. And empathy training, in contrast, let's see if we can move our panel out, increases the empathic distress regions of the brain. So we might be thinking about, as empaths, cultivating compassion, which we might think we already have, and less of this sort of dyadic expression of empathy. And this is a resilience model rather than wanting to make things change or wanting to make things go away. So that's kind of an important way to sort of reconceptualize. We're going to stop for just a moment and look at kind of where we are now and what I wanted to do for all of you. And I think maybe, just one. So we looked at empathy versus compassion training. I'm going to show two more, and then we'll start to move toward our end. So along with these contemplative practice studies, which you can literally Google, there are many, many of them, and many coming out of Stanford. So this next study that we're about to look at is one that I think is pretty cool. And it looks at compassion for others as having a stress buffering response, not what we would expect as empaths. They chose 59 adults, and they took an online questionnaire to measure their levels of compassion. And while they were being evaluated, they were given stressful tasks during compassion. So that sort of adds the component of it's not always mellow and wonderful when we're experiencing compassion. And they looked at several groups: a low compassion group, a high compassion group, a group that got supportive feedback, and a group that didn't. And the study showed that participants that showed more compassion had more interaction with supportive figures, and that tend and befriend response, lower blood pressure, lower heart rate, lower levels of cortisol altogether, and that measure of resilience, higher heart rate variability, which is a sort of slightly longer term. So cortisol can go up and down, heart rate and blood pressure can go up and down, but heart rate variability increased in the people that were reporting or that were testing for compassion and practicing it. And they reported less of a feeling of stress. So people with greater compassion might benefit more from sources of support. And then I want to talk about how long and short-term work. So they took another group of adults and randomly assigned them to either compassion meditation or cognitive psychotherapy. And they would do it 30 minutes a day for 2 weeks. Because you would think that psychotherapy, the alliance there might be helpful. And they were asked to bring categories of people to mind, like we just did, and imagining a time in that person's life when they were suffering, cultivating a strong desire that they might be relieved from suffering. They did a loved one themselves, a stranger, and a difficult person, as we did. And they had the instruction to feel compassion emotionally, not just cognitively. And when we feel emotion, we're also tapping into our bodily centers of interoception. But just to highlight the difference in the way we practiced, we actually deliberately tapped into bodily sensation a little more than you normally would see it done. They were asked to note any bodily sensations, especially around the heart. After 2 weeks, the compassion group had more pro-social tendencies, more altruistic behavior, more desire to approach others. And that comes also out of Richie Davidson's lab. So again, just to highlight that having compassion, practicing compassion for empaths is not sort of a thing of danger as we might have thought, but that it benefits the receiver of compassion, the giver, the witness, and then it has a long-term benefits. And I think this is a paradox for empaths, that we don't need to keep suffering out, that we actually benefit from moving through empathic distress, tapping into a universal source of compassion so that it's not kind of being bled out from us through our own body, and also approaching embodiment itself as a way of being. And I wanted to sort of highlight, as we're ending, really looking at today, I think empaths are not so drawn to social justice. And our sort of experience of social justice is kind of a two-person activity or a small group activity. So moving into this universal expression is important. And then what keeps it alive is not simply that we're doing compassion practice, but that as an empath, we're also looking at tools that expand kind of well beyond what we would think embodiment would be. So I'm going to screen share for just another moment so that we can see this full list. For those of you in the online course, we will also we'll make this available. So in stage one, of course, we don't want to fully reduce alarm, but we could do anything that increases vagal tone and sort of promotes resilience. So instead of trying to relax, we can stimulate connective tissue in the feet and the abdomen and the throat, the back of the neck, even the eyeballs, so an eye pillow. We can do connective tissue work. We can practice nasal breath with a longer exhale. And then I also wanted to highlight a fuller range of embodied practices. And one of the beauties of that video, which I hope you will watch and will link to for you, is that the compassion practice directly in that video mirrors the modern science and contemplative practice approach to compassion. And that in indigenous systems, one of which I was born in and living in till the age I was 2, embodied practices are also being in nature or dance or engaging in collective ritual or personal ritual, but collective, that community is important. Song, drumming, nature, mindfulness of the body, being aware of what's happening in our interior, movement, even things like apology, what embodied apology feels like, how to move from, oh, sorry if you're not feeling happy about that, or sorry about that, to really sort of embodying that through our bodies, truth, and even conflict resolution in the moment. So thinking of those all together as kind of a really full array of tools that we can use. I think that it might be a good time to move to show one last closing pose and then see about Q&A. And so Catherine is going to be our, no, yes? Do we have something else to do first? Yeah? So we're going to show our face down burrito pose. I'm going to just for a moment screen share. We're getting really good at reading each other's faces now when things go awry on Facebook. Oops, I'm going to have to pop out for a second and stop share. I think they still have some glitches because we have trained for you so thoroughly. So let's share now. And here we go. I'm going to share in here. Okay. So this is what we call face down burrito pose. And you take a blanket, you fold it 4 times the long way, and you lay over it. And you can see sort of that my ankles, there's a little space between my shins and the ground. So I'm going to show, Catherine's going to kind of show us how we would prepare. And what's really beautiful is that preparation and nourishment is really important. So she folds until she makes sure that the width of this is not going to be cutting into her ribs or cutting into her pelvis or under her hips. And she wraps it around herself. And here we're going to borrow a word from Kimberly, one of our online course greenskeepers, and call it a cummerbund. We'll also go a little bit out of gender, which I love. And so when it's wrapped like a burrito, Catherine is going to come onto her abdomen. So she shows you that wrap, and it's really quite easy. If she wanted to have another like clove cigarette roll for her ankles, she could. And then she holds it in place, lays over it. And then there's all kinds of other ways to prop. You can have another blanket that comes directly under the upper chest if you want. She's turning her head to the side. She also, if she wanted to, because I think hands are bony, she could rest her forehead directly down onto an eye pillow that goes between her hands. And she's seeing that she might have one handy and putting that right in so that you're stimulating the eyeballs, which stimulates vagal tone, and also the abdomen at the same time. So that one is a 2-for-1. And you're welcome to come into this now as we close, and Catherine can stay as long as she likes. I think it's sort of important to sort of not minimize, and I think we do in the modern worlds of yoga and mindfulness. We tend to maximize either moving yoga, like very sort of proprioceptive movement, and then on the other hand, in the mindfulness world, just sitting on a cushion. So really incorporating the tissue in your body, which is itself a metaphor for this one body. It links every cell in our bodies. And so sort of as we're preparing to come to a close, I wanted to kind of highlight for us again this beautiful, beautiful quote from Junot Diaz. And I think it speaks to this idea that in our modern yoga and contemplative practice communities, this sort of dominant patterns of conducting ourselves that are reinforced certainly don't approve of more tribal versions of embodiment and have often outlawed them. In fact, as recently as the late 1980s, when the Religious Freedom Act was passed. And these are really recent in our lifetimes, and also the idea of taking time to embody, to fully embody. So we'll look at that quote together while all of you who are chill out. This is actually from an On Being podcast that we'll link to for you. And Junot Diaz is an amazing, amazing writer. And he says, we are not a culture that has built into our way of being, our way of thinking, or our civic imaginaries, the practices of contemplation, mourning, grieving for what is lost or for where we don't connect, working through difficult contradictory emotions, collective suffering. That's not a part of our society. And therefore, where society leaves off, we need to take up. Society miseducates us. It gives us a lot of prompts and a lot of encouragements to be reactive, emotionally reactive, and I would add to that to withdraw, or to be very individual in our approach. I feel overwhelmed, or I need to withdraw. In this, we have received tremendous tutelage. So the ability to do what our societies seem incapable and unwilling to do is important. It's incumbent upon us to be reflective, to be complex, to be subtle, and to be nuanced, to take our time, right, to tarry in societies which are none of these things and which encourage none of these things, because, after all, there is nothing, I would argue, he says, more critical than to not align ourselves with the emotional baseline of any mainstream society. And so we really want to be thinking about the social pressure that sort of forms almost a counterflow to the things that we've been discussing today in our time together. So moving from this idea of being a sort of helper of others, of a few others as an empath, to really being able to tolerate and incubate universal suffering. So we're going to pause our screen share for a moment, and I'm just going to dip into Q&A for a moment, and we might not have a lot. If there are any, so we have most of our Q&A now is relegated to the beautiful help we receive in trying to resolve some of our issues. But if you have anything to, any urgent questions about resources or where to go, please let us know. And you can enter those now for just a moment. I'm checking the Q&A and I do not see anything new. So we're going to resume the screen share, and I'm going to minimize here. And so just kind of moving here into this idea of self-study. And here's some questions for you. When I'm exhausted and reactive, that should read, what frameworks are at play? Am I seeing this as an individual sort of me-related issue? And have I forgotten about the one body, that universal body? Am I focusing on self? Am I othering others? So one of my favorite practices is when I see someone or encounter them, I ask myself over and over again, other, other, other. We're getting a lot of agreement from the birds outside my window, if anyone can hear that. And then also to make inquiry into, am I in defensive mode or withdrawal mode? To my own detriment, right? So this idea that we need to withdraw in order to protect ourselves, that doesn't really work so well. That's an ingenious coping strategy, but one which doesn't work in the world we have today. Am I tapping into a source of energy that's larger than myself? Can I actually feel compassion in my body? And then can I be in a continual state of inquiry about some of the things that we've discussed here? So let's see. Angela asks, in evaluating if we are empaths or HSPs, are there different tools or are the tools the same? And if so, then why is it important to make a distinction between the two? I think that's a great question. I know that Elaine Aaron has on her website questionnaires that you can take, and we have articles on being an empath. The important distinction is that it has to do with the way we are in the world. And in particular, HSPs have more of a tendency to be reactive and to pull away, and to stay in that first stage of alarm mode in response to others. Whereas empaths are more merged and blended with others, and they stay, I think, more commonly in the empathic distress area. And so the way we would practice, the inquiry that we would make if we have both, is to inquire along each channel. But it's helpful in knowing ourselves and knowing the ways that we adapt to society and to our culture. we'll take just a moment. I want to thank everyone so much for coming in. Catherine, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
I think I can just close us up with the kind of logistical details from here. So I can do that now, unless you have more to finish up. Oh, you're muted, Bo.
I was getting a little superstitious there, like what actually would happen if I and you tried to talk at the same time. So we can, let me take just a moment to kind of get us into the part that I think you're going to talk about and screen share that. So it's practical details on the Connectome, these free webinars in this community that we're wanting to grow. And I'll get that up on our current slide if we can. There we go. And do you want to say a little bit, Catherine?
Yeah, definitely. So the Connectome is an online forum that we've established for some who attended our webinar back in August, I believe. We launched the Connectome, so we have about 70 people with access to that community now. That includes our online course participants. So all of you have access to the Connectome. It is on Piazza. And then anyone who's joining us from outside of our online courses, you will also receive an invitation to the Connectome in a follow-up email from us after this webinar. And our intention for the Connectome is to generate discussion from these webinars that kind of bring in content that helps us take our yoga off the mat. As Bo has put so beautifully today, really thinking about what does it mean to be using these practices in the world. And so we will be stimulating discussion. You'll hear from our panelists, you'll hear from myself and from Bo, but most importantly, you'll be able to engage with one another in discussion in the Connectome. And so, like I said, you'll be invited to join that. We would love to hear from you there. Same with our Facebook peeps. You know, I'm sure there's an interesting discussion on Facebook, but we want to kind of house it together. And then the email will also include some references that Bo made during this for additional resources for you. The video that we couldn't share, but we hope you will watch and note kind of your own reaction to. And I think we want to close by just thanking everyone for coming, for sharing in our learning community, and also for bearing with us during our learning moments. And, Bo, that was a great reference to calling attention to feeling empathic distress when, we have little technology faux pas going on, very candid moments for practice for all of us. So thank you for sticking with us.
Yeah.
And
so
finally, as you can see with Bo's sharing here, if you are not already one of our fabulous course participants for yoga, mindfulness, neuroscience, and the body, it is our most current online course. It's an amazing learning community. And for attendees of this webinar, we are offering a discount of $125 off of the course price. You can find that, or you can purchase on our website and use the code in caps Empath, as you see it here, to claim your discount. So
thank you, Catherine. Thank you, everyone. And yes, we may have to do this again. What we have discovered is that the technology hasn't caught up. So even with the best technology and them problem solving, it's still in process, like we all are. So thank you, all of you. And we will see you again very soon.
Thank you all.